Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
The Vietnam War was brutal. The official number of the dead are a staggering 58,200 American soldiers, 250,000 South Vietnamese soldiers, 1.1 million North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers, and over 2 million Vietnamese civilians were killed during the war. Stan Rose was there. This is his incredible story told in his own words on the 331 podcast.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 331 podcast, the place where great stories are told. My name is Chris Toss, and I want to thank you so much for checking us out and listening in on this month's podcast episode. I'm so honored and excited to bring you this month's guest interview. This incredibly brave and inspiring man grew up in Montgomery County near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and that is currently where we find him today. In 1969, he enlisted in the U.S. Army as a helicopter pilot to go serve his country over in Vietnam. He went through basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, then educated and specialized to fly helicopters in Fort Knox, Kentucky. 6 months later, on April 3rd, 1970, he landed in Vietnam, where he risked his life and served his country with courage and valor few of us will ever know. Fellow podcast listeners, it is my honor and privilege to introduce you to U.S. Army Warrant Officer, Vietnam combat veteran Stan Rose. Stan Rose, what an honor it is to have you on the show today. Welcome to the 331 podcast.
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. And
thank you.
Like most of my war stories, where you're a little liberal with the facts, but we'll get to all of that.
That's what my last guest said. He's like, that was very sanitized intro.
Yep. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh man, it's a pleasure to have you, Stan. I was thinking of just starting back at when you were in your late teens. So it's 1968 and the Vietnam War is raging and you're getting ready to graduate high school. What was life like for you at that time?
Well, Chris, I think you have to back up a little more than that. And everybody in my age group. So I, graduating in 68, let's go back to 64. I was 14 years old in 1964, and this was the first time that any war had been televised. And frankly, I'm sitting there watching it. Do you know any 14-year-olds? They're not the smartest people on earth. You're young and dumb. And the bottom line is that I'm watching this war, and it just became apparent night after night of watching the escalation. And then they brought in the draft, and then, and it's just escalating. And I'm sitting there watching it, and I'm going, I'm about to graduate at the exact wrong time. And I'm just, it affected every day that I was in high school, and all my classmates too. We're all wondering what's going to happen and what's going to, but we know the things, and just I have a short version, that somewhere towards the end of my senior year, 5 of us are sitting around drinking beer because we're the bad kids in school, and it's a Sunday afternoon, and my friend about beer number 3 said, "We're not going to get into college, are we?" I said, "No, we're not," because anybody who was in college, there was a college deferment. You didn't get drafted. So they weren't giving out scholarships. People were paying cash to go to college, and they were full, right? And so we were not going to get it. And I knew that from the time that I was 14. I grew up poor, and, and I knew that wasn't an option for me, right? Beer number 4. He said, "If we don't get into college, we're going to get drafted, aren't we?" I said, yeah, that's true. And beer number 5, he said, "If we get drafted, we're going to Vietnam, aren't we?" I said, yeah. And beer number 6, he hit me with a curveball. He said, "When we go to Vietnam, did you want to walk or did you want to fly?" And I said, "Well, I'm too lazy to walk. I guess I want to fly." Good. I made an appointment for us tomorrow down at the recruiters, and 5 of us went down there. 2 of them were disqualified for various physical things, and 3 of us ended up being helicopter pilots. We were 18 years old, and unfortunately, the mortality rate for helicopter pilots was about half. Half the guys don't come home, right? It was bad enough that you had to sit in front of a board where they explained to you that if you do this, there's, you're 50-50 on coming home. And, but the bottom line is that I had no childhood ambitions of being a pilot. I just happened to be able to pass the tests. And frankly, I'd never been in an airplane before. And before I got in a helicopter and flew for the Army.
Yeah, I guess like you would also think that chances are high I get shot as a soldier too. Or you don't really know what's going to happen, right?
Well,
So
that's the whole Vietnam hanging over your head thing. I didn't know.
right, yeah,
But everybody has those same odds. It's kind of
yeah,
interesting when you look at the Vietnam War. You have to put it in perspective because only 10% of the troops in Vietnam saw combat, right? Support. All the other
yeah.
guys are the guys who move the equipment and bring the food and get all and deliver the mail, and 10% saw combat, and so
Mhm.
they're not the guys telling the stories most of the time. They're
Right,
there's a few of us who don't mind telling the stories, and that's just me. I'm a storyteller, and I've made a career of it since. So the bottom line for me is that I don't mind talking about it, but
right.
you got to remember at all times that the guys who are out there in the real combat stuff aren't the guys that like to talk about it much.
No, no, most of the time not. Um, my grandpa was in World War II working for Royal Radar, which was a part of the Royal Air Force,
Yeah,
and he could only talk about it for maybe like a minute, and then he started getting choked up, and he's like, I can't say anymore, and I'm like, oh, like that was years and years ago, and it was
right.
still really fresh, emotionally fresh for him, right? So, it's super common.
Had an interesting moment when I got back from Vietnam.
Mm.
And of course, I had been a volunteer fireman in my local community, and mostly because, they had a place on campus where I could smoke, because I was one of the bad kids. So, anyway, when I came back from Vietnam, I went to fire drill on Monday night and ran into one of the guys I had joined the Army with. Hadn't seen him for years. Didn't see him in Vietnam, but we just went separate paths. But we were standing around at the end of a fire drill, and we were just talking about our classmates, and remember that half of them are dead, right? And so we're just
Mm.
doing the list. Hey, what happened to Charlie, and what happened to this guy, and what happened? And we were there, and all of a sudden I became aware that there was several rings of young people who used to be my age looking at us like we were crazy, and I'm looking, we really hadn't started talking about anything that was bad, just who was dead, right?
Right.
It's doing a roll call. And one of the guys in the back said, "Oh, I get it. They're just screwing with us." You know, and I'm going, "What?" We hadn't started talking about real things yet. So you understand that you come home to a group of people who have no idea what you're talking about. Yet they don't have the context of life or death.
But I
Doesn't
mean, like
occur to the average person.
there was like 59,000 dead Americans, right? I mean, like,
56,422, but who's,
yeah,
yeah,
he was counting. So they know. I mean, people were like dying. So
yeah.
it's weird that they had that reaction, like they were just messing with you. It's like, no,
Yeah,
man. Like,
the second reaction was we go down to the local watering hole where the World War II guys hang out.
yeah,
Where all
yeah.
the parents of my friends and my parents, and and it was very interesting because as soon as I was there, it was like they said, "Well, tell us what it was really like,"
Mm-hmm.
and I made a mistake, and I told them, but they didn't. They all went to war as a group. They were together, and they were in it till it's over there. And
Yeah,
they
that's
were
true.
they were going to be in it for the long haul. We went for a year. I literally on the plane on the way home from Vietnam. It was so exactly 1 year. It was the same people. All the survivors were on the same plane, right?
That's
And
so
and
interesting.
so we did 1 year, and so you find out early on that it's not a good idea to make friends because it hurts more when friends die, and so you make acquaintances instead, and that's it's a thing that's very hard to get over afterwards. You stop caring, or you stop, you know, making friends is hard, right? Because
Yeah.
When friends die, it
Yeah, well, I
hurts.
mean, it's a coping mechanism, right? You know, the
Exactly.
more you're attached, the harder it is to deal with that, right? I mean, you got a job to do, you
Yeah.
know.
And
um,
that's really true in the combat troops. I was lucky. I was mostly home at night. I'd go out and play war during the day, and move the guys around and get them what they need, and then I go home. And so I get to go drink at the officers' club and eat real food. Well, as real as the Army can make. But the guys that were out in the field, they got no respite. They got no breaks, and it wasn't good. You know?
no, exactly. So, what was your day to day like? I was always curious about that. So, like, you're sleeping on a base, right? You
Yep.
wake up, do you go to like a mess hall for breakfast, and then you go to like someone after that gives you an assignment for the day, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, so a couple of different things. First, there are two different types of helicopter aviation in Vietnam, and one is the air cavalry, right? And the air cav was a new concept, and this was the first war that they applied this concept. So we could take masses of men. And let me do a quick description of a typical day in the life of the air cavalry. Somebody decided that this spot out in the middle of the woods needed to have control.
Okay.
So the air cavalry gets the mission to go out and build a fire base out in the middle of nowhere, right? So the first thing they do is they drop big bombs and knock down all the trees, right? And then they shoot at it for days and days and trying to make sure there's no bad guys there. And then the jets come and lay down some, uh, napalm and things to burn stuff up, right? And then on the day that they decide they're going to build a base, the air cavalry will mount, somewhere each company probably has 20 ships. They probably put 60 helicopters, each with 9 combat troops, right? And they take a whole bunch of guys out and they go land them in this hole they made in the jungle. And by the end of the first day, they've transported in bulldozers and artillery pieces, and they pushed the jungle back to the point where it's a big clear area, and they put up barbed wire around it, and they've got big guns and bulldozers, and they're making revetments, and suddenly there's in the middle of nowhere in one day they own the territory, right?
Ah,
And then they operate out of there, and if you've they made a movie out of the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young.
right.
The description of the first air cavalry mission. Unfortunately, there was never another one like it. But that's the air cav, and it's an interesting concept. So we were mobile; we could move to where the enemy was, and on the other side of the coin, the enemy in guerrilla warfare, if they don't like it, they just leave. Right. So
Right.
they got a big
Right.
operation going on there. There's lots of guys out there, and we go and build a base there. We might never see anybody, right? And then we move again. But that's the hopscotch nature of the war.
So
We
that
would,
kind of tells me a few things. Like, so one, I guess, I mean, the exposure to Agent Orange would have been huge for everybody landing in that landing zone, right? And
um,
then the
typically
vehicle,
not.
yeah,
Sorry, just the
no, it's
quick
okay.
Agent Orange question
Hmm.
was when they blow all that stuff up and clear it, that's not a problem. They clear it back to where they want to. All right. The Agent Orange was used on the highways to defoliate back from the highways so that guys couldn't hide and ambush
Oh,
the
okay.
IUD ambush sites, but no, you're onto something there that everybody's together in the air cap. The second part was the folks I flew for, we were like the rent-a-copter company. And so I was a soloist. I didn't fly with other people, maybe once or twice a month. I'd get together with some other guys if we were moving a bunch of troops but it wasn't, sometimes it was people I didn't know. It came from another company, and they were just gathering up some helicopters to move some troops. But for me, every morning I went down to operations and I grabbed a folder. We probably ate something at our rooms, it wasn't like we went to the mess hall, but we had food was an interesting subject in and of itself. But the hooch maids who cleaned our rooms and stuff, we always brought them whenever we had some captured rice or something like that. There was always a bag of rice sitting around, and it's Vietnam. They took care of us. But you go down there to the ship. I went down and got the mission package as the aircraft commander. The co-pilot, the crew chief, and the door gunner are already there getting the ship ready. And that package I picked up really just said, it gave you the guy's name or call sign and a radio frequency and where to go see him. And it just says, go to Ankh and call, Ranger 27 on 61.10. So you just fly up to Ankh and land to get fuel. You call the guy and say, what are we doing today? And if they were fighting the war, you were fighting the war. And if they were just doing nothing, you did nothing too. But they always had a mission. They had to compete for the ships, right? But every day was different. The mission that I liked the best, mostly because it took me the farthest away from home, was up in the Highlands. I flew for the Charlie 75th Rangers, and the Ranger companies, Saving Private Ryan, same Rangers, 75th Rangers, but they had two different teams. The 5-man teams were the recon guys, right? And they basically, when you flew for them, you picked up 5 guys, and they would give you a block that's 3 miles square, 3 miles on a side, pretty good piece of land. And they say, go out to that block and land 5 times. And one of those times, everybody got off. But you had to make all 5 landings so that the bad guys didn't really know where they were. They only had a 1 in 5 chance of knowing where the guys were. And those guys, their job was to watch people move, right, and figure out who was there and what they were doing. And then the only time they came in was when they had been compromised, which means somebody found them, right? And so now they're fighting their way out, and we'd go pick them up while they were running from the guys shooting at them, right?
So if you were given like an order to go pick up a team that's been compromised, you're probably going to be coming in to a hot landing zone.
Always.
And yeah, so you have a gunner, like you're not in charge of the guns because you're the one flying the chopper. So you're just in charge of the landing and the extrication, right? But then you have a gunner also opening fire.
Yep.
And is that 1 guy or 2 guys or?
One on each side.
One on each side.
It's an M60 machine gun, so it's it fires pretty good sized bullets and moves a lot of them and makes people duck. And
right,
so the trick is not to shoot the guys that are running towards the ship to get on, but
right,
make sure they shoot the guys that are right behind them.
Which probably isn't easy. I mean, your adrenaline is through the roof, and those guys would probably be in camouflage of some kind, right?
Well, so typically what happens is that they've moved tree line to tree line. If there's an open place, it's probably because somebody's trying to grow something, And so I'll land in an open area, because I have to find a place that I can get down. And there at the edge of that area in a tree line, the bad guys are in the next tree line. But as soon as our guys leave their tree line, the bad guys run across the field and try to get there before I can take off, right?
Okay.
And so it was always interesting, So
wow.
The good guys who are coming towards you, they take turns firing backwards, and we're firing. And whichever person wasn't flying, whichever of the pilots wasn't flying, is also shooting out of his window, So it's an interesting game.
No kidding. So I heard that the 75th Battalion is kind of referred to as the tip of the spear, kind of like that specialized group that goes in behind enemy lines and is kind of like the first ones, like I think the U.S. Army right now, like that's who first went into Afghanistan at the beginning and did that kind of thing. So is there any missions that come to mind for the 75th during your time out there?
Well, every one of them is a good story.
Yeah.
Those guys are a little bit crazy and a little bit, out there. And They're the bad guys. They're our best bad guys. And
Right.
they're an interesting group of people. I have a great story. I was at a bar up in that Highland country. It wasn't my home base, but I was going to spend the night up there. And I was talking about something, and I don't know if he figured it out yet, but I'm a character. I don't mind who I insult, and blah blah blah. And
You're
so
honest.
I'm drinking and and carrying on, and somebody says, "Okay, Mr. Tough Guy, what makes you think you can mouth off to everybody?" I said, "Well, because I fly for the 75th Rangers, and I don't ever have to worry about being in the bar alone, And they
Right.
said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, let me give you an example. There might be 50 people in this bar." And I stood up and said, "My name's Lucky 19, which was my call sign. My name's Lucky 19. Any of the Rangers here?" And I heard some grunting over there, and I said, "I need you to come kill this guy." And 3 guys stood up and started walking towards me. And I said, "Okay, I was just kidding. I just wanted to make a point." They would have killed him for me. You live in a world where the rules are different, right? If you do something that's stupid and you're going to get other people killed, it might be in everybody's best interest to kill you first. They talk about
Right.
lieutenants getting fragged and things like that, and that was all actually true. There's valued decisions that are made, and you would think nothing of it. I mean, another example, I'm not a poker player. However, before I left Vietnam, there was always the game, and it was the serious game, right? And the serious game, and I went and played one time just so I could say I had done it, right? But if you cheated at poker, someone would shoot you, right? It's like Wild West poker, right? And everybody in the place would swear that you committed suicide. No, there was just no other way. Right? It's just a different set of rules in a place, and which also makes it the safest place in the world. It's like when everybody's armed, but you've never been to a more civil place where people don't fuck with each other,
Right.
because you might get shot.
Yeah.
Very civil. What was hard to get used to was coming home, and I can still remember the day I'm standing out in front of my house, and I'm trying to explain to somebody that I just don't get it, where I have to pay extortion money to someone because you might be too stupid to walk down my stairs. I have to pay an insurance company. It's like, I'm paying for protection money because if you trip and fall on my stairs, I might have to pay you. And I just don't, right? And I come from a place where you take care of yourself, right? And that kind of thing, so not, and yet to put it in context, that sounds stupid, but when you're coming from a place where everybody's responsible for themselves and nobody will care if you do something stupid and get yourself killed, nobody cares, unless you were the guy carrying the heavy stuff.
One of the things I've always I admired about your story was that, like you were given that opportunity to, kind of be a little bit safer, like flying that jet Ranger helicopter in the beginning, flying generals around.
Yeah.
But, you wanted to be helping out the infantry and actually, going into missions. Was that something that you just envisioned yourself doing when you were going over there? Or was that something that you,
so
how
let
did
me
that
put a
come
little
about?
context around that. And the problem is that, when I interviewed to be a helicopter pilot, my recruiter said, they're going to tell you about, how dangerous it is and stuff like that. And what you need to do is give them the my country right or wrong speech, and why would you want to do this if you might get killed? And I said, well, it's my country. But part of my whole thinking the entire time was, if I'm going to be at risk, well, then at least I'm doing it for a good reason. Those guys that are in a bad area or need to get out, the Ranger teams, a good example, right? They're compromised. They need to get out of there. And I, I'm the guy that's going to do that. That's how I justified being in Vietnam. And especially since, when I first got there, It's like, it doesn't take long to realize that we weren't really fighting a war for any good reason. It wasn't a great war, and if I had done what I thought was morally correct, I would have deserted the army, right? And I call it my personal act of cowardice that I stayed in the army because, I wanted to come home later and I don't want to be a deserter and blah, blah, blah. But the reality was it wasn't great. But as a pilot, I knew that I could do some good for good people and get them out of bad situations. And you have to put them in bad situations too. But but that was the thing that made it okay for me, and then I got stuck in this VIP company and I didn't want to be there. And so I fought to get out for months, and finally made it, and went to a company that just lost half of their aircraft commanders, so it was an interesting place to go. I went from the safest place in Vietnam to the worst,
And where was that? What was the place called? Like, what was the name of was it a base? Was it a city? Was it a village? Like, what was that?
So flying the
area
VIPs,
you got moved to?
I was up in Quin Yon, which is a coastal city. And
it's beautiful, actually. I saw some pictures of it. That's a nice place.
I'm going in February. I'm going there, and I'm going to go look at all the places I used to fly. So, nice. Anyway, I was in Quin Yon flying for the support command, the general who ran that whole valley and stuff like that. So I knew the area. And when the general left, he asked me if there was anything he could do for me, and I said, yeah, get me out of this stupid job, and he got me into a local company. I only moved 15 miles, to the new company. So it was, and then I was flying in areas I hadn't gone up into the highlands very far, flying for the VIP side, but was automatically going up. And nobody liked the Ranger mission, because you had to fly 100 miles to get there, and and they were always hot. And so I just sort of took that mission as mine, and so I did that a lot.
And we'll be right back after a short message. Dad, can I go to McDonald's for a Happy Meal?
Sure, Lincoln, I'd love to.
I love them because they have a toy, fries, and a burger, and some chocolate milk.
All right, let's go.
Okay, Dad. All kids love them because they're so delicious. Yum, yum, yum.
Today, we're doing my hair with my favorite hair products, Horrible Essays, their detangler spray, and their gel. Done with my hair. And this is why you should use Horrible Essays.
And back to the show.
I've always wondered this, like, when you read up on Vietnam and, like, there was a South Vietnamese army that was fighting with the Americans, and then, like, you're living with Vietnamese people, but then you have to go attack these types of Vietnamese people. I mean, how did people process that? And was it just like, we have a job to do because they're trying to kill me, so I got to kill them? Like, how were people able to kind of deal with that?
Well, you know how to ask tough questions, but what you have to remember is, so there's this guy, Ho Chi Minh, right? And right. Ho Chi Minh was a pastry chef in France, right? And Ho Chi Minh at the end of the Second World War begged the United States to come occupy them, because
right?
if you let the French come back, we've already had it, our fight with the French, and it'll end badly, which it did, right? And so the other thing to remember is that the Minh, it's a family name, right? It's the Minh, Ho Chi Minh, and the Minh were South Vietnamese, and the Cong were North Vietnamese, and they had kind of a civil war, and Ho Chi Minh wins the war in a sweeping maneuver to the north. And then the U.S. stepped in and drew the demilitarized zone, said, okay, everybody stay there. we're gonna have democratic elections and stuff here in South Vietnam. You guys stay up there. Well, he's saying this to South Vietnamese guys who just won the war, right? And so they created this horrible situation where all their family and friends are still down there. And we went and passed out a bunch of televisions to people who had never had them before. And it was a miracle. Our guy won the election. It was crazy. That's why I talked before about it wasn't really quite a just war, but we were creating this situation and it didn't have to be that way. All right. And so everything was very confused. The other side is you take a bunch of young and dumb 18, 20-year-olds and you have to, in order to make them into warriors, you have to dehumanize the enemy.
Right.
And you just teach them that there's no such thing as a good Vietnamese and blah, 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 and then you get there and some of your friends get killed and then you get a little pissed off about it. And, suddenly you're a warrior too, so there's some interesting stories.
Right. No, thank you for
that.
that.
It's not regular human stuff, right? You've got this prejudice that's been, dictated to you, right? But it gets reinforced, and the scariest thing about killing somebody, it's fun.
Is that it's fun?
Yep. When you feel justified in what you do, and you feel like you're paying back for all your friends that are dead, you smile and yuck about it and have a couple drinks with the boys when you get home, right?
Yeah. Wow.
It's horrible.
It's a sad truth, I guess. I mean,
yep.
Yeah. You see that with war, people get almost addicted to it,
Yep. There are a lot of guys who came home, active guys that were fighting the war, came home and re-upped and went back. They call them lifers, but they can't make it back in the States, so they come back to Vietnam.
Yeah, wow.
I know one guy who's there for 3 years, 3 different years.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yep. And lived.
Did you ever fly over like the Ho Chi Minh Trail?
Yeah. With the Ranger teams, we, of course, asked President Nixon. We were never in Laos and Cambodia, except when they gave you what we called the special map missions,
right?
Where you get the maps that don't have borders on them. And things like that. But yeah, we were you weren't allowed to have a map with the thing, as if they were going to treat you any differently because, you had the right map, but.
Well, because that's where the Viet Cong was, right? They were in Laos and Cambodia,
so
right?
The Ho Chi Minh Trail was just a supply route. And this had been going on so long with the French and before us, that they tied the tops of trees together and let them grow, and it turned into a tunnel in the jungles. They had, nobody knew where the Ho Chi Minh Trail was. You couldn't see it, and it was all camouflaged, but they were moving trucks. You could hear trucks running, the guys that were out there, and still couldn't find the trail.
No way.
And so it was a very interesting, they had been working at this for a long time before we got there.
Right.
There's a secondary story about the Cu Chi, the name of a base outside of Saigon. And we picked a spot and built our largest infantry base on top of a tunnel system that had been there for generations, like 4 levels down tunnels. And we built our base right on top of it. We couldn't understand why the bad guys could get in without going through that.
No way. So they didn't even realize it.
No, there's a great. I've been in. I got down 2 levels and I got so claustrophobic I had to flee. But they widened them so that Americans can actually go in there, right?
Wow.
But these guys, they had tunnels where they had anyway. Extensive tunnels and good at it, and so we built a base right on top of the big tunnel system, right? And so we didn't know, right? and very interesting,
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean,
we
they
made,
know the lay of the land. It's their country, right? So
you betcha,
they
right?
had it all
And
there.
they get to pick when they fight with you, right?
Yeah.
If everybody looks the same, you go out and you my one of my infantry friends used to call it seek and don't find.
Mm,
It's kind of don't don't poke the bear. Go out and do your patrols, and they may not decide to fight with you that day. Okay
yeah.
with us.
Watch out for the booby traps.
Yep.
Yeah. Did you ever fly over the Oshawa Valley? Did you ever go up in that area?
Yeah, that was the area where I flew with the Rangers. The Ashaw up
Wow.
into the Suical was more towards the Suical Valley was one of them, and then the Ashaw was where he wrote the book about we were soldiers once and young. That was up in the Ashaw. That's up in the
Do,
Highlands.
do you have any memories or stories or missions that come to mind from that time?
Well, they were all again. That was the entire area, that that I'm going to really enjoy going back to. When I was there, it was all bamboo huts and countryside, And I was just looking because I'm planning a trip for the spring, and I can get an Airbnb at most of those places, and that lists all the department stores and shit, So
Times have changed.
I might have some trouble finding stuff that I remember. But one of the interesting places up there is, and it's what is it? There is a place where they had the final decisive battle with the French, and there's 4,000 Frenchmen still up on the hill.
Oh,
Every
is that
time you
right?
think you're fighting the army will tell you that they're pajama wearing, they don't know what they're doing kind of guys.
Right.
And they kicked the French's butt and left 4,000 of them up there standing up facing France, four in a grave, and
Oh, is
that's
that
up on the
right?
top of the hill and in one of the passes they used to play. And that's one of the places I want to see again. But it's all of those places. It's like it's hard. I can describe some of the events that happened up there, but it was something new every day.
So you flew it's called the Bell UH-1 Iroquois, right? Otherwise known
Yeah,
as the Huey.
the Huey. Yeah.
What was that experience like being 20, given the keys? It's a set of keys they give you to start the engine, right?
Nope,
And just,
there's not a
oh
key
no,
in it.
it's not a
No, if you
key.
know how to
Okay, so
start it, you
you
kneel them
just,
all day.
oh really? So just
They,
like, can you describe what that was like starting to learn how to fly those and going up with the gunners? I mean, that just must have been exhilarating.
First of all, they, I was unusual. I was different than the average person. The average person comes and gets assigned to a unit. You start your first 3 months, you're a co-pilot, and that means that the aircraft commander has a plastic tube that's about 1.5 feet long. It's used for taking oil samples, and he uses it to whack you on the helmet when you're screwing up, right? And so life as a co-pilot is not good. You're just being constantly told you don't know what you're doing and getting hit with a stick, right? And so it's a learning process, right? And at some point, you have to have 3 months in country and 300 hours. And then all of the aircraft commanders vote on whether or not you can be an aircraft commander too. So have you served your time, right? Well, I did all that time while I was in a VIP unit. And so when I came to this unit, I was already an aircraft commander. And I hadn't been through their initiation process, and so it was like I was a weird duck, and so I to this day, I only remember the name of two of the pilots that I flew with in that company. I was with them for 7 months, and I don't remember anybody. One guy we called Goofy Grape. I have no idea what his name, and one guy named Eric Hahn, and I happen to remember Eric, and I don't know why. and
Did everybody have nicknames?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
most of
So
the time,
what was yours?
magnet ass.
Magnet. Why
Yeah,
were they calling you that? What
because
were
I
you
got
getting
shot a
drawn
lot,
to? Get you getting shot?
and it was bad enough that my maintenance officer told me And I never got shot down technically in Vietnam, but I flew 5 aircraft home that never flew again.
Oh, wow.
And my maintenance officer took me to the edge of the wire and he showed me a place just outside the wire. He says, if you fly another one of those aircraft across this wire, I'm going to shoot you. I said, why? He says, the paperwork, if you just crash it out there, I write it off as a combat loss. But you bring these wrecked machines across, I have to account for all the parts and all the, it's 3 days of paperwork every time you do that. Don't do it. And I wasn't allowed to bring ships home anymore, but I got shot up a lot. And, typically, and I have to say that I mean, I got 2 Purple Hearts, but neither wound was very significant. I was lucky, and but typically they weren't good at leading the helicopter, so you took a lot of hits in the tail boom, which is nothing, but when they get better at it, or when you're slow, I got 1 Purple Heart for. I was landing on a hilltop, and I watched a guy stand up and throw a grenade that went off on the windshield.
Oh, wow.
In front of my co-pilot. And then the other, I came back from a day of flying, and it was a rough day, and there'd been shooting and this and that, but wasn't a particularly noteworthy day, just wasn't any worse than anything else. And I went up and we had, there was an inspection due on the helicopter. That means I needed to come back and run the helicopter after the mechanic had changed the oil filters or whatever he was doing. You have to do a test run. So I went up and I got the crew food. And when I came back down, my crew chief is looking me up and down, and he's going, have you checked your body for holes? I went, no. And he said, come over here. And he had taken white string and pulled it through the cockpit where the 3 bullets came through between me and my left arm, where I was sitting, up through the cockpit. And he said, I'm not sure how you can sit in there. He had pulled the string through the holes. I had to go get in there and sit. And I'm going, I don't know how it missed me. Well, I looked down, and on my left wrist, where I wore my Mickey Mouse watch on the inside of my wrist, it looked like Mickey had been hit with a piece of rebar. It was a perfect little divot across the face, and my watch is sitting in blood. And I had taken a bullet hole in my wristwatch. And no idea that it had happened. Somebody had to point out that it was a bullet that did it. So, but I didn't know.
It's just miraculous, right?
Another day,
Can you rewind that a little bit for me? Like, so.
Oh, you can't rewind that watch anymore.
No. Yeah, that was a good pun, actually. I didn't even mean to say that. If we could rewind the Mickey Mouse watch. That grenade so you're landing, is that a rescue mission? You're picking up that team and somebody pops up out of the grass and throws that grenade? I mean, how does that?
Almost. So this was the 173rd Infantry Division, and the 173rd, unlike air cavalry, where the air part is primary, the 173rd is an infantry battalion, and so they've got 4 or 5 companies, each with 130 guys. There's a bunch of them, right?
Yeah, it's big.
And they're an infantry group that owned the valley, near the coast, north of Quignon. And they had 6 helicopters. So they could do their normal stuff, easy. But when they had something big going on, they'd call on us for help. And so one day they called us because their big unit down in the valley was under pretty severe attack, right? So they were going to they asked us to come. I think we got about probably their 6 and another 6 helicopters, probably had 12 of us. And again, you can carry 9 fully loaded combat troops, right?
Okay.
And so we're putting them in, and basically we sat back and watched while the artillery prepped the top of the hill, and then the jets came to the top of the hill. And then they give us our mission orders. We're going to land a company-sized unit in there, just doing a string of guys until we get them all up there. And they're going to come down the hill while their compatriots, retreat to the base of the hill to reinforce, right?
Okay.
So that's the mission. Well, the joke is after running jets and artillery for the whole morning, at noon they tell us, well, it's a cold LZ. You're not allowed to shoot without permission.
Oh my gosh.
Does this make any, there's people that get paid a lot of money to issue these stupid orders. And so anyway, we go in and I was one of the first two ships. I was number 2. One of their guys was first. And so they had 6 guys and they knew all the guys in the area. And so we just tagged on to them, so we're doing flights 2. And so I was the second ship in. Pardon me. And when we landed, I just sat there as my guys are getting out of the helicopter. I watched the guys flip the plywood off the top of their hole. They'd been in for the whole attack.
Oh, wow.
And guys stood up and threw a hand grenade from 15 yards away, and fortunately it was one of those, you probably don't know, but they made hand grenades out of wood. They had a big handle in them. You turned the handle and threw it, but it was full of ball bearings and anything they could put in there, wire and stuff like that. But they were handmade hand grenades. And so I watched him throw it, and it came and it hit right on the windshield of my co-pilot, who was a Vietnamese guy. And I actually assumed he was dead. And I got hit in the face with, and when I opened my eyes, everything was white. I thought I was blind. So I'm assuming that my co-pilot's dead and I'm blind. And so I tell my crew chief, I said, I can't see anything. If you want to get out of here, you're going to have to tell me how to fly, right?
Oh, wow.
He said, pick it up. And when I got it going, the windshield was broken all the way through. And and as soon as we got a little wind going through it, the smoke cleared and I could see again. And so I was only blind for 15 seconds, but it was I remember thinking that wouldn't be a good way to go home. Yeah.
That's a wild story. Did the guy die? Did your co-pilot die?
No, the last I saw him, he was slumping down. That's because they were shooting at him,
Okay.
And then I couldn't see him. And after the smoke cleared, he got back up and he was just fine.
You told me to look up April 16th, 71, the siege of Pinon. I couldn't find really anything about that. Was that that time? Was that
no
that fight, or
this
what was that?
A separate war story, So that I go up, I fly the 100 miles up to Pleiku, was the biggest base up there, and in early 71. They decided to end the war by taking everybody that they could find and all of the South Vietnamese regular troops and do an attack into Laos and take over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And so Pleiku, which used to have 5 assault helicopter companies, and the company-sized unit is 25 helicopters, right? So there were 5 of them. They went from 125 helicopters in Pleiku to 0. They took them all up into Laos and lost a bunch of them. Anyway, I get the mission package, says go to Pleiku and call this guy and do whatever he wants you to do, right? And so I go up there and it's a ghost town. There's nobody there. And so I went up and I'm waiting, getting fuel, and the guy on the radio says, "Hey, are you willing to go to Funan?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Okay, I'm sending a truck," right? And I'm sitting there going, that was a weird conversation. Am I willing to go to Funan? What? And just about then, a medevac helicopter comes staggering in to the fuel place, slides to a stop, and got bullet holes all through his tailbone, right? And I sent my crew chief over there and I said, ask him if he was at Funan, which of course he was, right? And I said, 2 other helicopters before me got shot down in there and the crews are still there. And when the truck arrived, I took a full Huey full of morphine and bandages, and one Vietnamese colonel who was supposed to go in and take over it. And it turned out that Funan it's an engineering compound. Picture, 3 or 4 football fields. That's the size of the compound. And one end of it has some buildings, and the other end is, where they store equipment and stuff like that. Well, the bad guys had overrun it because everybody left Pleiku. There was nobody to stop them anymore.
Okay.
And so a battalion-sized infantry unit overran the compound. And so they had 76 wounded in there, and they needed morphine and bandages. And so I went down there, and there was one of those 2-engine push-me-pull-me kind of airplanes, FAC, Forward Air Command. There was a guy flying over there, and and so I was talking to him, and he described where all the bad guys were, and and I'm looking at it from overhead, and where the buildings were, there were 3 buildings that kind of made a U. It was, and right in the middle of that there was a big stone fountain. So I'm looking, all the 3 helicopters that got shot down were out in the perimeter where the helipad was, with no protection. There was no protection out where they had a designated helipad. And so I was talking to the ground commander guy, and I said, "How attached are you to that fountain?" He says, "I'm not." And he blew it up, right?
Nice.
The fountain disappeared, and I went in and landed, and I was literally, the bad guys were on the other side of the building. They couldn't hit me and stuff, and I unloaded, and that. It was so much fun. I did it again, and I kept doing it all day.
So see, he has some kind of a bazooka, and he just aimed it and fired it.
Everybody's got C4 plastic explosives. It's a variety of ways to blow things up. Everybody's got some. I had some under my seat. But the joke is that because I was landing in a safe area, I had time to unload all the stuff and load a whole bunch of wounded guys, and then I took off the other way and had some protection. So I went in and out. I got all 76 wounded out.
Oh,
wow. And one time during the day, they were trying to bring a convoy up the road to reinforce this compound, and they got pinned down, and they had some wounded guys. And the reason I tell this is a day in the life. There's not one day that's any. There's some just cool stuff that happens, right? So everybody has left this area, all the aviation assets, except me, who came from the coast 100 miles away, and the Pink Panther gunships. And the Pink Panther guns were notorious guys. Their missions weren't inside Vietnam. They had permanent maps with no borders on them.
Okay.
They were all across, so they didn't go with the regular guys. Anyway, I'm down there talking to the convoy guy, and he's telling me the bad guys are, they got them pinned down there. He says, "We're having trouble getting, and while I'm talking to him, I get this call on the radio from Pink Panther, somebody or other, and he says, "Sounds like you need some help." He says, I'm coming home, and I've got half a bag of ammo. You want some help getting in there to get those guys? I said, "Yeah." And so it's just like, these are 2 Cobras, right? And Cobras were still pretty new, but they were just lean, mean killing machines, no
kidding.
So anyway, I get out of the blue, somebody comes to the rescue, and I get to go land, and while I'm landing, these guys just started pounding the tree line and keeping everybody's head down while we went in and got the wounded guys, anyway, at the end, we said goodbye and thanked them, and they said, "Anything we can do?" I got a few more rockets, and there had been an area where I'd been landing, and when I took off and went out to the west side, there's big open fields, but there were some guys out there they were just taking pot shots at me, right? It was just, they were in bunkers or, something, but they weren't organized. It wasn't a group of 10 guys. It was 2 guys, and every time I go, somebody would shoot at me. They hadn't hit me yet, but I said, "Go fly over that area and see if there's anything you see." And so they kind of cleared me a nice little place, Later in the day, the last flight out, when we were leaving, and it was just about dusk, and the as we went over the fence of the compound and headed back towards Pleiku, my crew chief said, Stan, there's sappers in the wire. Sappers, the guys trained to sneak under the wire with explosives, right? And these are the guys that were going to, come in during the night. And so I turned around and he shot them with the machine gun, right? But now I was headed kind of a way I hadn't been before. And so when I turned out over that field, that spotter plane over me said, break right. And you just follow the rules. When somebody says something like that, when I snapped to the right, a rocket went right across my tailbone.
Oh,
and he says, break right again. And so this little hut that had been out there all day, turned out they had rockets and they had a 50 cal machine gun in there. And so suddenly my world is not fun anymore. And by total accident, I flew over a battalion base camp at 40 miles an hour. 40 knots.
Oh, you mean like a North Vietnamese battalion base camp? A North Vietnamese battalion base camp? Wow.
Yeah. And I had a lifetime picture in my head, of these guys dropping their dinner, right? And reaching in, you know how they stack all the weapons in that little teepee?
Oh, okay.
These guys are reaching in and pulling triggers, and the whole world is turning into tracers in front of me.
That's crazy.
And by the time I got out, I got all the way back up to Pleiku, and that ship never flew again because it had 250 plus holes.
Oh my God, how was it able to fly? It missed all of your fuel lines and everything?
The one piece of metal, it was a 50 cal round, went in and went through 3 different deck levels of the thing, because I was in a turn when it hit me. And so I was almost horizontal, and it went through 3 layers and peeled back a piece of the sheet metal on top big enough to cover the anti-collision light, right? So, anyway, there was 6-inch or more hole, exit wound hole, right? It cut electric lines that were attached to the engine. It had holes everywhere. There wasn't anything that didn't have holes in it, And
so that was a write-off.
Oh yeah. And by the time, and by the way, the reason I wanted you to look it up was because that was the first day of what is now known as the siege of Funan. And the official record says no helicopters were able to get there until the 3rd day.
Oh, man.
I was there 15 or 20 trips in there the first day.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. I mean, you're a hero, man. You've rescued 75 men, wounded men, in and out of there. Like, that's a lot of people,
But that was just what you did for the day. Yeah. It wasn't like, it wasn't, everybody, this hero word is really hard for me to swallow.
Yeah.
I was really good at what I did, and I liked what I did,
Yeah.
And I don't think of it as heroism. I think of it as there were a bunch of us that did this every day and made it better for the troops on the ground, And it's a toss up, which I like less, being called a hero or being called thank you for your service. I'm not sure which I like less.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was going to say that later on. I won't say that anymore. So I was thinking about, all of this crazy stuff going on. You said you landed back in the States the year almost to the day when you left. How long did it take you to transition? I mean, how was that process like for you when you got back to America?
So because I had switched companies in the middle of my tour, the guys at my new company did not know the day that I was going to go home. And the rule was that 13 days before you go home, you stop flying combat missions, and you get 10 days. You're still flying, but you're doing the what we call the ass and trash missions. Just the non-combat kind of stuff.
Oh, okay.
And taking the trash out, and stuff. And then your last 3 days are travel time to get down to where your airplane leaves to go back to the States. Well, I had it in my head that if I quit flying, I was going to get killed by a Jeep or something. I couldn't shake the feeling, and so I just didn't tell anybody, right? And the last 13 days I was in country, I averaged 13 rounds a day hit by helicopter.
Wow.
Including the day after they found out when I was gone, and they were really mad at me, right? And wouldn't let me fly that day. And then one of the guys got shot down. I had to go pick him up, right?
Okay.
Him and his crew out of the middle of the combat zone. I got blown up pretty good that day. And the next day, they gave me a broken helicopter to deliver down to where my airplane was. And on the way down, I heard a Mayday call. I was by myself in a Huey and went and picked some guys up that needed it desperately. And on my way to the airplane to go home, I got hit several times, right? So then I get on the plane, right? And I end up in a restaurant in Seattle with a bunch of my guys that I had been on the plane with on the way over. And we're sitting in a very nice restaurant. And I was only, I was 36 hours from getting hit by bullets, right?
Right, totally.
And now I'm sitting in a nice, and we're telling horror stories and cutting up and feeling relaxed and blah, blah, blah. There's a friend of mine that I'd gone to flight school with who was on that plane named Jerry West. And you're not old enough to remember that Jerry, his nickname was Laker because Jerry West was a significant basketball player with the LA Lakers. And,
that's right.
So this guy was known the whole time we were in flight school, and every that I've known him, he was like the worst cut up, troublemaking, and he is being so polite to the waitress that she is in love with him. And he says things like, "Ma'am, do you make your potatoes with real potatoes?" And she says, "Oh, yes." He says, "Because I've been for a year. I love potatoes, but we get these dehydrated things that they try to bring back to life." He said, "Do you make your own gravy?" And she, "Oh, yes, sir." And he said, "Oh, I dream of seeing a boat of brown gravy and white potatoes, and I can't help it." Well, she's falling over herself trying to be nice, and we're all sitting there going, "What the hell's wrong with Jerry?" And this is not the Jerry we know and love, And he's sitting there like a saint with his hands folded and fingers joined together. And she brings back a big plate of potatoes with the gravy in there. And he looks her right in the eye and says, "You don't know how long I've waited for this minute." Takes his hand and dips it into the potatoes and stuffs it into his mouth and is just smearing his face with it. All of it takes a bath in the gravy. I have not laughed hard in a long, long time, but this is there was a really good NPR series about the Vietnam War, and at the end of it, they had a beautiful statement, and they said, the U.S. fighting man is the most complex weapon we had in Vietnam. And we sent them home and forgot to unload them. So if we're still recording, I just lost my host. So I hope Chris gets back. I see the recording still on, so I'm going to close this out. Again, my name's Stan Rose, and, Chris will, I'm sure, explain this in a later edition. Thanks for your time, folks, and I hope you don't mind me telling a bunch of war stories, and, hope you found it entertaining. Stan Rose is signing off.
Thank you, Stan. You did have a little glitch there at the end, but you wrapped it up really, really nicely. Thank you. So I was born in the late 70s, and I remember growing up hearing stories from my parents and my grandparents about living through the late 60s and dealing with the Vietnam War and seeing the Vietnam War on TV. I always wonder what it was like for people that were over there in that time period. And I want to thank you, Stan, for sharing your story with us today. I want to thank you for listening. Please like, follow, or comment below. This has been another episode of the 331 Podcast. See ya.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.